Hey, what's up everybody? This is Therapy Today. My name is Isaiah. I am a licensed professional counselor. So today we are talking a little bit about the dichotomy between symptoms and how we really diagnose. And this topic was brought up in a recent video. A lot of commenters when I was talking with Maria Lawton, who was on the channel sharing her expertise, both personal and professional experience with narcissism. She talked about one particular symptom or sign, I guess is a better way to put it, of narcissism that she had observed in her clinical experience that kind of rubbed people the wrong way when they heard it. If you haven't seen that video yet, please do check it out. It helps to give some context to what this discussion is going to be about today. So one of the things that she pointed out was that she had noticed in her clinical experience and also personal experience that narcissists tend to make very little eye contact, or I think the way she phrased it was that eye contact was different from the way that you and I do it. I think some people took it to mean that they don't make consistent eye contact. I don't know if that's exactly what she meant, but she did say that they will look around, kind of look past you, look around you, because they're more focused on their internal state and what they can get from you instead of focusing on you as a person. And where that started to bother people was, I think, a lot of commenters who had maybe struggled or had been diagnosed with ADHD or had been diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum pointed out, and rightfully so, that those diagnoses also carry some implications when it comes to social interactions, whether it is different types of eye contact or lack thereof, as well as different issues with coming across as maybe uninterested in some of the things that you might be saying when you're in conversation with them. And they were very quick to point out that it's not because they're not interested or that they are only focused on themselves, but just that the way that they process things being neurodivergent instead of neurotypical, that they were anxious or worried about being suddenly now perceived as now narcissistic, when in fact they might just be inattentive, or that they process social interactions a little bit differently than the way that we might expect. I think those are fair concerns, so I wanted to break some of that down in today's video, talking about diagnosis and how we use labels like narcissism, like autism spectrum disorder, or like ADHD, and how we can have a little more nuance about that, and how the proliferation of therapy speak can actually be harmful for some of these people who struggle with some of these disorders or who are labeled as such. As we get into this video, please do like and subscribe. That helps the channel to grow, helps us to bring on great guests like Maria, who was able to share some of her clinical and personal experience, and for us to speak into some of these topics. So the first point that I'll say is this. There are a lot of symptoms or signs and presentations of different disorders that show up across different disorders. When we talk about eye contact, a lot of different diagnoses, like we see in the example that brought this whole discussion in today, eye contact will show up differently based on some certain diagnoses. When we talk about autism, or we talk about ADHD, or we talk about narcissistic personality disorder, or we can even throw in social anxiety disorder, our interactions might look different based on these diagnoses, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just because somebody's eye contact seems off to you somehow, that they are diagnosable with something. Another common piece is sleep. Sleep is one of the first things to get disturbed or wrecked or messed up when someone is struggling with their mental health. And so things like anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, PTSD, a bunch of other major diagnoses affect sleep. So it's not just that if you notice that your sleep is disturbed that you can suddenly be diagnosable with all of the above disorders. I think rationally we understand that, but this is why there has to be some nuance around the conversation of diagnosing and labeling, as well as that there needs to be training for mental health professionals around diagnosing, so we don't just see one facet of one particular diagnosis and say, oh, well, they must have this because I saw this one particular symptom, when in fact, a bunch of different disorders or diagnoses might share a similar presentation or symptom. And so one thing that Maria said for context was really helpful, in that we're not just looking at particular features, but we're looking at the totality of that person as much as we can within a 1-hour intake interview. We try to get the fuller context. How are they in different environments, at school, at work, with their family, by themselves, or socially, as well as some of the motivations or the reasoning behind why they present a certain way. So if you want to compare and contrast between a narcissistic personality disorder versus something like autism spectrum disorder, the reason that eye contact might be different in both of those cases, are very different. It's important to recognize too that culture will play a significant role when it comes to something like eye contact. In some cultures, like here in the United States, it's considered respectful to make consistent eye contact, and that helps to establish trust, and it helps to establish that you are trustworthy and that you are paying attention to the conversation. In some other cultures, it might be considered respectful to not make as consistent eye contact. It's a sign that you consider and respect the person in front of you that you might not make eye contact. And so those cultural considerations are important too, and we need to consider that in light of the bigger picture of the person and maybe why they present a certain way, and not just picking and choosing like, oh, I see these pieces that kind of support my guess that this person is diagnosable with X, Y, or Z. And this is where I do think that some of the proliferation of therapy speak and the colloquial use of some of these diagnostic labels can be unhelpful, because people might get kind of a stereotype view of what ADHD means, or what being autistic means, or what being narcissistic means. And they kind of find little pieces of somebody here or there, and it becomes very easy to just start throwing labels around. Oh, that person shows these kinds of tendencies. Oh, this person is that, this person is that. And that can be very unhelpful for people who don't present in maybe what we might want to call a typical manner, or kind of the average person, which is also a very kind of misleading. But it makes it easier for us when we meet somebody who might feel off a certain way, or if we have some kind of reaction to them. It may have nothing to do with them, but it becomes easier for us to label that person as something or disordered, or that they have some kind of problem that they're not aware of or they need to fix. And there's one commenter in particular who talked about thinking through, like, this became another piece of anxiousness for them, that like, oh, now I need to be doubly aware of my eye contact. I already knew it was something that maybe threw people off, or that I was already aware of, but now I'm worried about people thinking I'm narcissistic because of this one particular feature of how I tend to interact with people that I'm trying to control, that I'm trying to mask. But now I'm worried they'll think I'm narcissistic, that I'm self-absorbed, that I don't care about people just because of my eye contact. And that's why I think it would be very helpful for us to have more nuanced conversations around diagnosing, around symptoms and presentations of different diagnoses and mental health disorders, so that there's a better understanding and nuance when it comes to actually getting to know people, instead of just putting them into a certain category and either writing them off or thinking of them a certain way because of that first impression. So of course, I do hope that for all of the therapists, all of the residents, and all of the grad students who are pursuing a mental health career, that of course you're having training, you're having supervision, you're having conversations and discussions about how to properly diagnose and how to properly arrive at a helpful and responsible diagnosis, instead of just picking up on the first couple of most obvious things and not digging further. I personally also try to have my client and their family's input whenever possible and whenever ethical on the diagnosis. I'll talk them through my thought process. What features do I see? How do I see the bigger picture of how does this diagnosis help explain what's going on in your life? And getting them to confirm or reject whether that actually matches with their experience. And so for me, it's more of a collaborative process with my clients. Not all counselors work that way, but I find it gives them some ownership of the story and helps them to understand what they can be doing with that, instead of just being given a particular label to do with what they feel. In terms of interpersonal settings and even seeing people on YouTube or interacting with them on social media or in person, what I would really encourage is that we actually have real conversations, that we don't take the most obvious part of something that we might be able to stereotype or be able to pick out and say, oh, this person fits in this box, this person is this label or this category. Because what that does is it shuts off relationship. We feel like we know them already, that we don't have to do more work to get to know them. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about this community, is that people feel really comfortable in the comment section sharing their stories. And for the most part, we have a very supportive group and community that gets to know people without just dispensing advice or saying you need to do this, or you're this person, or you're that category, and I don't want anything to do with you. And what I'm really promoting here is relationship, having real conversations, really getting to know the person instead of just seeing them through a filter of they have this disorder or this diagnosis. And in speaking to people who specifically felt bothered by those comments on the previous interview, as we're talking about things like eye contact or presenting like it's easy for you to accidentally ignore what somebody's saying because you're focused on what you're going to say or on something else, I know that you all are doing the work to have that kind of self-awareness, to know that that's not your intent, that your intent is not to be narcissistic or to act in a self-absorbed or selfish manner, but that worrying that somebody might perceive you that way. And that's why I make these videos, so that we can have some more nuance, that we can have deeper discussions about what it really means for narcissists to maybe avoid eye contact or just not care so much about eye contact in some respects. So I think the education part is important, but also that encouraging people to have these real conversations, to really get to know one another. I think that's something that we're missing a lot. And I hope to encourage real relationships where it goes beyond just seeing somebody as a label or as a diagnosis, but getting to know the real person and being able to care for them and love them because of the unique way that they are, instead of judging and alienating them for that. So all in all, for those of you who did comment something similar to what I was talking about today in the previous video, I really do appreciate that you all spoke up and advocated for yourselves. I do appreciate the opportunity to kind of follow up with Maria's interview and be able to delve into some of these topics. And again, if you haven't seen her interview yet, it's definitely worth a watch, with this potential controversy notwithstanding. So I do encourage you all to check that out. Like I said, please do like and subscribe. That helps the channel to grow. And at the very end of it all too, what I'm encouraging for all of us, when we're talking about diagnosing, or we're talking about narcissism, or we're talking about different kinds of mental health labels, what I am really hoping for is real connection between people. And that is what gives life a lot of joy and what gives life a lot of meaning, and when it's lived in community. So thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll see you all next time.